That's why I love John the Baptist. You read about him in the Gospels. He's this rugged man with long hair and a beard who's wearing camel's hair, and he's eating locusts and honey in the wild. People go out to him as this weirdo who dunks them in the River Jordan and brings them back to this new life. There's something strange but magical about him. And there's something in the Christian tradition there that I think is waiting to be reawakened. And I think also, as we've been touching on the confidence to embrace your group in a loving way. By all means, you can love other groups. By all means, you can welcome them and seek to be compassionate and brotherly towards them. But that doesn't mean a neglect of your own group. And I think that's something that people of the West are feeling very keenly right now, is what about us? Do we matter? We could be made a minority and worse, and probably a disliked one as well. And again, I think this is maybe where some of the rhetoric from some of the pagan types, again, not all, but from some of them comes from, because I've seen it myself online, and it's sometimes hard to read, from different groups, different religious groups, you're going extinct. That's a cruel thing to say. I would not be saying that to another group. Look at your people. Your women are all being, taken on by black guys and Pakistani Muslims, and you don't do anything. You're pathetic. It's hard to read that. You need spiritual poise and control and depth to be able to receive that level of bile. And a lot of guys, to be blunt, don't have that. And their instinct is to defend. And in one sense, I can admire that sense to defend. But that can become unconscious, and it can lead us into ideology rather than the spirit. So it's a real opportunity, I think, for us to deepen the message, deepen the understanding, this is Christ all over, deal with the darkness of the world in love. And love does not mean soppiness, again, as so many Christians and moderns have been told.
I brought these two who I think are leadership in the right-wing space when it comes to Christianity and have important communities. And I wanted to talk about, firstly, secondly, and amongst it, how their respective events and respective fellowship have gone. And actually, we can start with that, and I'll go to Luke first, and then we're going to talk about rising problems in Europe and England, various things, drivers of suffering that are coming, and how we can respond to that. But we'll just, we can go, the conversation can go anywhere, but maybe Luke, you might want to respond, because last time we talked, it was great to hear that your event was approaching. How did that go? Any reflective moments that you remember from the event, and just anecdotes from it and things that went well, and
went really well. It's always amazing how just a couple of days leaves you with so many memories and such a feeling of community. So that little crew, which is often connected only via these digital tendrils, becomes reified when you see face to face all these people. One of the nice things that was different this time was a whole bunch of people from heard about the retreat from a visit I paid the Lotus Eaters. So a whole crew showed up who had only kind of briefly heard of me. They'd just seen my one appearance when I was talking about the conclave, and apparently that was enough. A little 5-minute clip on YouTube, and they booked their tickets from various places and came to see. But including, and this is what's always the bit that excites me, I guess, the most about an event like that, people who are seekers rather than committed Christians, but they come with their questions, and they think of it as a space where they can, much like, their connections to these online communities are often based on asking tough political questions and being really straightforward and honest about things that make them uncomfortable. People came to this retreat and were really open. They said, I'd love to find God, but how do you explain suffering? Or what does this Bible verse mean? How do you account for what are your views on predestination? Things like this. So just a really rich space for all kinds of serious-minded discussions, but it feels expansive because the people there. It's one of the rare spaces where you can both be open with one another spiritually without fear, because it's a Christian retreat, so you don't have the awkwardness to bring up a spiritual topic. You can also be open with them about matters that in other company you would be reticent due to kind of political correctness. Maybe it partly depends which part of the world you're living in, but certainly around where I live, then I'm walking on eggshells most of the time when I'm in church. So it's kind of that unique combination that's quite refreshing to be there.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think also Richard can probably speak. Were you about to say something there? Sorry. No, you weren't. You did finish right. Richard could probably speak to that as well, because I think that with his emerging community, which he's moved from a political area that you are also in, and people from that Lotus Eaters community are, but move that into a Christian perspective, or helping people find the ground of truth, but also in a space that they can speak the truth. They don't have to walk on eggshells in the broad church they might be. Broad church, as the Church of England calls itself, which we can get into. But yeah, tell us how that's going, Richard, since you launched it a few months ago.
Yeah, well, look, thanks for having me on, Scott. And yeah, really interesting to hear about your retreat as well, Luke. Sounds very interesting. And a lot of crossover as well. For starters, I mean, I think it's worth saying, you know, I came from that Christian spiritual background originally. I had a long path through, I guess you could say, spiritual experience to sort of the generic path that modern Western man takes into the East, you know. Maybe starting with Eckhart Tolle and then back through Buddhism, elements of Hinduism. And then because I'm much more conservative leaning, those movements in the West tend to veer very left. And as you might imagine at the time, that was completely intertwined with wokeism. So I was looking for, well, where's that? There must be a spirituality that's more conservative leaning, you know, which would suit me more. And that led me down into traditionalism, which I'm still very sympathetic towards. But it still didn't quite get to the depth of it, which landed on Christianity. And before I was doing any of this, I did have a small YouTube channel and a small community. It wasn't as explicit in terms of its political outlook as what I'm doing now. But it did give me that background in understanding that at the root of the issues the Western world faces is, if you like, this foundational fracture in that we've lost touch with our heart and soul, you could say, the non-rational, as I often call it on the channel. So I was aware of these problems going in. And it was more my wife who said, you know, you should talk about politics because I'm always yabbering on about it, you know. And it led to the channel. But then it was really always a long-term mission to try and bring it back to these core matters. And I knew it would be a bit challenging, but it's actually gone easier than I thought it would. And a lot of people are open to it. And my ears really pricked up when Luke said, you know, his retreat attracted lots of seekers. That's been exactly my experience. And that's a really wonderful thing as well, because, you know, it's not so intellectual. It's not so theological in my experience. It's more men, especially, almost, you know, asking those big questions, but almost searching for what their roots are. You know, they're digging, and they're trying to find, you know, who am I? And a lot of the guys I speak to are exploring paganism as well. Some are stuck between paganism and Christianity. And of course, the online world, as you know, it's always high octane. It's always aggressive. So they kind of feel they have to pick one or the other and hate the other if they're going to choose one. So a big part of my role is just trying to give them the space in their heart and mind to explore things openly. And I think they appreciate that because, again, everything in this day and age is so tight and confined. And the online conversation can be great in some ways, like right now. But in other ways, especially in the Twitter sphere, it can all be very, you know, limited to, I don't know how many characters you get in a tweet now. And it tends to be aggressive as well, which I don't think really helps because it doesn't let you think deeply. And one of the really beautiful things I think about Christianity, what it really offers, it's what I sometimes like to call deep Christianity. It took me a long time to penetrate it myself. But it's that journey of the soul that takes over you. And you realize, oh, actually, I don't really, I'm not playing much of a role here. Something is deeper than me and it's occurring inside of me, revolving around evolution, change, rerouting me. My roots are grasping something that I don't understand. And it's something like that that's always inspired me about the Christian journey. And with that, I'd be very interested to hear your two thoughts on this, but I always struggle to find that in the church, especially the mainstream Anglican church, which of course I'm surrounded by. And I do love the Anglican church in many ways. It's my culture, it's my history. It's hard for me to dislike it, but it's also hard for me to deny when I go in one that I'm getting the depth that I'm looking for. So, it leads to people like me more embracing mysticism or orthodoxy or elements of Catholicism. But the point I'm making here is, broadly speaking, if I bring it all together, it's a really exciting time, because I think we have a new generation, especially of young men, who are looking for something and they're really looking. And I remember thinking years ago, it's almost like new atheism, oddly enough, has almost done us a favor in some ways because it's stripped away these sort of cheap Sunday school interpretations. And it's making people almost think, well, it's really challenged them on this deep level. What is Christian tradition? What is Christianity really? Yeah. We can say it's a man with a beard on a cloud. Isn't that silly? But there's something more that people are searching. And I think when I say it's an exciting time, I think it's that blend between something very new and dynamic, and it is an evolved version of our culture, our tradition, our faith, but it's also rooted in something much deeper and older than we've been experiencing in recent times. And there's something really magic about that, that really ancient, but awakened with a new dynamism, which to my mind is just central to the revival of Christianity, of the West, and for us as men ourselves as well. So in essence, that's the message I'm getting to. And I think that resonates quite deeply with people, especially because it's up to them as well. It's not just me telling them, oh, go and do this, go and do that, go and read this. It's up to them to do the digging and find these elders, find this guidance, which is why, it's a challenging but a magical time.
What do you think about that, Luke? The comments on the Church of England, comments on the challenging, the emergence of possibility at the moment.
Yeah, I really want to pick up on what you were saying about it being young men who churches often lament as being the hardest demographic to reach. And I wasn't selecting for young men in particular for my retreat. And yet it was almost entirely people in that exact demographic, the kind of 20 to 35 male cohort, and of people who weren't necessarily interested or raised in church until quite recently. So that this is the kind of unconvertible crew, according to most churches. And interestingly, so many of them had stories of going along to a church because, in a sense, they were wanting to find God. Something had happened in their life, usually, that led them to go to a church. And then when they were in the church, they were picking up that most of the messaging, the things that their ears were hooking onto, at least, were this woke, modern, very shallow ideology that they had already been experiencing in the rest of their life. And that completely turned them away. So I can't... And meanwhile, of course, if you talk to a lot of the pastors in these churches, in quiet moments, they will say, well, actually, I'm not as left-wing as I portray, but I do it because I'm trying to appeal to the congregation. I'm trying to connect modern culture with the gospel. That's the defense that a lot of... I imagine if you go to a lot of Anglican churches and talk to the guys in charge, then not always, that there are some genuinely really progressive, there are churches led by true bleeding heart progressives, but But often there's just a sense in churches that we need to portray Christianity as left wing because that's the way that the culture around us can have a chance at hearing from Jesus. And so my experience from the weekend retreat has really made me think of the folly of that perspective, because there's this whole group in society, these young men, who have the exact opposite position, that they need to hear, if you're going to try to bridge, if you're going to do the Pauline thing of being, as a Roman when you're in Rome, if anything, they need to hear the bits of the Bible that feel more right wing. So I guess what I would actually suggest is just present the gospel as it is, rather than trying to spin it to match it up to modern ideologies, because actually the real appealing thing, and the strength I think people discern in Christianity, is that it stood forever, and God is unchanging, and his truths are forever, and there's nothing that the modern heart cries out for more. But this group, this cohort that seem to flock to our content collectively, are also the future leaders of the church. So then they are a really important, significant group of people, and some really dynamic, wonderful, healthy, exciting people were at my retreat, who you could imagine being such an asset to the kingdom of God in the future. And certainly I know people who've gone to retreats in the past and have since been baptized, have since become regular attenders at their local churches, with a view that now that I know that there are based people in the Christian world, I can put up a little bit with the idiosyncrasies of my local congregation. We do need to stand side by side by people who are Christians with other political viewpoints. We don't need to be constantly arguing about politics. We just need to reassure people that their understandings of the world, the truth that they've understood, that their pastors and the people around them haven't quite cottoned onto yet, like these can be, I would say they not only can be, but do line up much better with the content of the Bible. So yes, it's always really interesting to hear other people who've kind of walked a parallel path and encountered the same series of sequences. And I guess in a way, you can look at it that God, nothing takes God by surprise. He knew about what would happen with the internet and YouTube and Discord and all these other tools that, and he's put us in positions where we become part of his kingdom building with this new cultural moment. The people who have connected with us have done so through God's will and arrangement.
That goes to show that it's about the spirit of the depths, not the spirit of the times, which is grounded in will to power, the spirit of the times that we want, the democracy, right? That holding to that, and as you say, Providence knows, even when it seems like that's all the thing that's winning, he knows. And so to change yourself to meet the spirit of the times is also, of course, a complete mistake. It's the same thing that the Jays did with the bull. That was the spirit of the times. That was the spirit of we want, of the surface desires. And what the spirit of these, which are projections, it projects, it creates the bull, it creates the egregore, it creates the demon. It's a projection of their desires. But you mentioned Lotus Eaters, and I thought, yes, that's good. And it goes to show in that it's clear, you see in that it's not enough. Firstly, the ethnic group thing on its own is not enough. Because it's not the philosophical thing philosophical approach, the utilitarian approach, or even trying to lean into ethnic irrationality, which it seems to be that they're sort of position trying to ground things in that, is not enough. But it's not even just that. It's that the fact that it's the ground of reality is him. It's not it's not simply that it's this will make you feel better, this will make you things go better in your life. That there is an explanation for all the things, all the questions, like you were mentioning, Luke. And I do agree with also what you were saying with that sort of new atheism and woke overreach. Both of those things actually worked in favor for this stuff. And also, even with Peterson, there was a breaking of certain powers and principalities, demons that were keeping people in that spirit of the times, or the thought regime of how the world presence is. Because fundamentally, he is underneath the phenomena of things, right? So that's the hope, is to be able to, through these things and through the practices, to show people, look, here, it's not about simply pragmatism, because we have to get them out of that pragmatic worldview to see that it is the essence of things, it is the truth, not just simply for life. It's not simply for to feel better. It's not for joy, because if you seek joy, you get it, and you end up in Lucifer. That's the problem, right? If you seek joy and you go after joy in the spirit, you'll get it. That also leads me to dispensationalism, because that's something that's been in the news a bit with on Tucker Carlson, when he talked to whatever that guy's name is. I can't remember what his name is, but how easily it can also go wrong. You can get these, you could call them Luciferian or satanic versions of Christianity that aren't actually getting people to him and the essence of things, that are putting things in the way. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I'll give a comment or two. One on new atheism, that I think the new atheist movement was a gift to the church, in that it was either a group of people who refused point blank to put forward an ethical position on anything. Well, I guess what I'm saying is that their position was that ethics is completely subjective. If they were being consistent, they would sometimes admit that therefore right and wrong doesn't really exist. And then anybody who disagreed with that was just easy pickings for Christians to come in and go, oh, do you believe that evil is genuinely wrong? Well, let me show you a different perspective that makes sense of that belief. Or if they tried to put forward a moral position, suddenly their arguments were extremely weak, and they'd lose all of their debates, because they were essentially talking nonsense. And they didn't have a cohesive moral position. So kind of performatively, you could see that although they claimed that you could derive a strong societal foundation off of the back of atheism, they demonstrably couldn't at that point. And then when more efforts were made to say, can we pair these atheistic convictions with a kind of emerging community with a shared moral understanding, that in a sense produced a lot of the woke and progressive stuff that we've seen since. And I guess the people who were in new atheism, who were anti-woke, a lot of them have ended up embracing some weak form of spirituality since. So which is why we find ourselves in a different moment, because the luminaries have either adopted a false religion which has completely consumed them, the kind of woke progressive stance, or they've actually started to say nice things about Christianity. So it's God has kind of, it feels like judo, the forces of darkness were pushing in one way, and the rug was pulled out, and and spun round, and everything's actually worked. For those Christians who are paying attention, the whole thing has been an opportunity, maybe an opportunity for sifting the wheat from the chaff, but certainly when I started this project, my YouTube and so on, I had a very strong sense that the opportunity was the Peterson to Christ pipeline. It was taking people who had already been on that journey from Dawkins to Peterson and say, okay, carry on that trajectory, soften yourself more and more to God's revealed truths. I can't remember, Scott, the other thing that you brought up that I was going to respond to, but I'm happy to hand back. I'll jump in if I remember it.
yeah, that's okay. The other thing that came to me as well was that the fact that I think a lot of people, and people have said this to me as well, is that it allowed them to recognize that, oh, hang on, demons might actually be real, when they saw the mimetic parasite moving around and saw it in the way people would mutilate their bodies, in the pink hair and all that sort of stuff. Hang on. And then they scrambled to find something to hold on to. So it's not so much, of course you don't want to get stuck with these bridging figures, but I think some people, not everyone, but they've begun to realize that there's something here, and at least then looking into the unconscious, that there's something outside the factical worldview in the modern, because it is a thought regime as well. There's a thought regime in place, like a magical agent that renders being how it is for us in modernity, when we're raised in modernity. It's in the language, it's in the science that we're taught, and it actually makes the things of the surface senses present as they do. And you see it when you get off an escalator. There's a sort of push that's not working. When an escalator's not working, you walk up an escalator that's broken, and then you get off the end, and there's this push. That's spiritual necessity. That's the habit of the. It's not just something psychological. That's what has been. It's the past, right? That's an example of the thing that's in place, just as a simple example for people to understand. But the other point that you probably want to respond to was Ted Cruz, dispensationalism. Was that something that was that
dispensationalism? Yes, yes. Okay, so which where to start really? But I guess one thing is. So one thing that came out of that discussion, I remember being about the especially the American church and their historic views on certain doctrines, and then of course dispensationalism also has links to the whole issue of Israel, which is obviously big and has these giant geopolitical forces acting on people, as in your views on dispensationalism may play into what your thoughts are on whether Christians should just inherently support Israel because it's is mandated in the Bible. I guess it's interesting that Tucker Carlson, maybe I'll start just there, that he's having discussions about matters which are kind of tertiary Christian doctrines on his enormous platform. Like, it's hard to deny the significance of Tucker Carlson, and I think it's exciting in a sense that he's just opening up these conversations, and people are probably hearing about these kind of debates for the first time, and I mean, I'm resisting diving deep into the topic right now because we could be here for another 3 hours.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, it has been explored to death anyway. That's actually, we know.
But in a sense, I just wanted to say, I just wanted to say it is interesting to note. In a sense, it could be a sign of the ascendancy again of Christianity in the West, that these things are of interest to such broad audiences that people are being exposed again to sort of intricacies of doctrine. So,
Well, this is a subject that I think we can lead into from that is the terrible economic conditions in the United Kingdom due to war, possibilities of civil war and ethnic conflict in the country, but also whether that is something you flee or whether is that something that there'll be providential purpose to be around for, and whether, as you've talked about before, Richard, that suffering as an impetus to discover that, I don't have the power, the will to power, I don't have the forces to do this, which is key to the discovery of he who is, key to the discovery of who the ground of the psyche is, who the ground of reality is. That suffering can be to the true conversion, not just I'll go to church. I mean, to him approaching you. And so what do people in England do? Is the conflict coming? Is the suffering coming a good thing? Should people look to leave? And establish a city on a hill somewhere else, or should they stay? What do you think of those points, Richard?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think all of this interrelates to everything you've just been chatting about with Luke, and lots of really interesting strands there to bring together. And I think we can bring it all back to Peterson. I try and avoid Peterson now because he was so huge for so long, and I think we're almost post Peterson at this point. But
Yes,
you can't deny, but I mean, he's sort of been swallowed by the neocons at this point. But the point is that he was a hugely impactful figure at the time. He was a catalyst to something of an awakening, and it's very, very important to recognise he came from outside the church. You know, I still don't personally see him as a Christian. He wears all these suits, but he seems to me to have not taken that final jump. And in my experience, I could really bow before Christ when I'd given up. I had to give up. And I don't want to psychoanalyze the guy. It's not my place, but it seemed that he had some personal challenges. And I thought at that time, here we go. Seems like God's given you a path there, similar to my life, similar to many of my friends who are Christian. You get challenged very deeply. You sort of have to let go. And that's that big jump. And why that's so important in the context of modernity is a jump away from the mind, Modernity is the mind, really. It goes back to Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Well, not necessarily in the Christian context. We're before thinking. And this is why I think so many men are drawn to something outside of even what the modern mainstream church preaches in the sense of initiation. And this is what interests me so much about initiation and why I've had this fascination with it, because it's helped me so much. And I often advise guys who are into Peterson to read Joseph Campbell, who I know is another sort of pop philosophy figure and all that, but he's very accessible. And he's sort of like Peterson's twin brother, but of the heart and spirit rather than the mind. Both Jungians, both very accessible. But Campbell's really taking you down into a route of spiritual evolution, unfoldment, something beyond modernity. He's pointing to the eternal. And it's a very good place to start in understanding him. And then, well, personally, I rerouted back into the more Christian lines on initiation. I suppose Richard Rohr is the authority in that. I mean, he's an incorrigible lefty, but if you can read around that, his lines on initiation are very good, actually, especially Adam's Return is really worth reading. But anyway, I found these things really, really helpful. And one thing that this brought home for me was the sort of, the tactile side of spirituality. Rohr speaks a lot about a blind man and Christ spits in his muddy hands and wipes them in the guy's eyes. These lovely images of, it's not intellect, it's not sitting down having some conversation where you're pontificating about, I don't know, moral principles with regards to the economy. It's raw and it's real and it's getting involved. And I think that really speaks to men. I think that's what men crave. And they sort of struggle, understandably, in many ways, just sitting down and listening to another lecture, because it's just more modernity. It's more just mind. And it seems to me that the role, if you like, of the reawakening church is something like, returning to the earth, and through that the spirit, and so on. And with that comes challenge as well. And I think in that challenge, in that groundedness, it brings a sort of wisdom which is beyond intellectual knowledge. There's a knowing that allows you to deal with the challenges of the world, which I wouldn't say I'm completely blessed with, but I would say I've been touched by it, which has turned me from someone who was completely clueless, chasing women, chasing the things of the world, to someone who could clearly see this is just leading me into hell. It comes with a pretty face, but it will pull me right down. And that's not intellectual, it's heart knowledge and wisdom. Now, I think to bring this full circle, this really speaks to what I would argue both Peterson and the pagans have both got wrong. And I can't speak for pagans on the whole here because I don't know the tradition well, and it's unfair if there's no one here to defend it. But from what I see online, a lot of it is this turn back to the material again, sometimes in the form of blood, sometimes in the form of nation. And this is one step better than modernity, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's still much better. And I get why people are drawn to it, but it's that you're still going to go back to the material world through that route. And it's the same with Peterson. You know, he gets to the very, very jumping off point, and then it's back to the mind, back to this sort of reinterpretation of everything through this Darwinian evolutionary frame, which again, better than modernity, better than New Atheists, but we're only ever going to circle back on ourselves if we do that. And this leads us, and why I think, you know, Christianity does hold the key, because it combines all those elements. It's got the tradition element, it's got the national element, if you're interested in that, but it also puts all of these beneath the hierarchy in God's love, you know, God's all-consuming love, which is beyond our understanding. And the falling into that, in my experience, has been that which has stabilized me more than anything worldly. Now, I'm someone who grew up in Leicester, highly multicultural town, in an education system, bad to be English, bad to be white. And I grew up thinking that, you know, I embraced, crazy as it sounds with my middle class accent, I embraced Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. I mean, that's what I thought you do. That's what my growing up was. You know, first it was Nirvana, Rage Against the Machine, then into hip hop, then into drum and bass culture. But I realized as I grew up, like, this isn't really me. You know, these people aren't speaking about me. If you listen to, you know, Talib Kweli speaking about Pan-Africanism, this isn't my battle. You know, it's nothing to do with me, really. But I had no other coordinates in my life that told me, like, this is your culture. This is a way you can express yourself and find yourself. So the point I'm making is it's understandable for people to seek those dynamics and coordinates in their life to give them shape. But it's all dependent upon, you know, that overarching spirit. And this leads me to this big question right now about, you know, I think you mentioned it earlier, Scott, which is a very good point about we can't expect the world to be perfect all the time. In no time in Christian history has the world been absolutely perfect and we've all just held our hands and said we're in Eden again. We can maybe find that spiritually, but we're never going to find it in the external world. There's always going to be challenges. There always has been. Some of the journeys that, you know, the Christian greats, the saints had to go on were brutal and they died horrible deaths, and they were often minorities. But when we look at the state of the West, it does seem to me there is something that we need to tap into, which is deeper than the problems we face, because it gives us the poise to handle them. And I think if we don't have that poise, we'll just get eaten alive in the drama, the destruction, the fights of the world. And I do see that in people a lot. And, you know, they're very unhappy with me when I say, look, you need to try and not work from the anger, because the anger can be good in one sense to motivate you, but it can blind you. And you don't know you're blinded by anger until it's gone and you've got things wrong. And if you're getting things wrong, the media will pick up on it, other people will pick up on it. You'll look like a liar. You might have acted in the wrong way in the wrong moment because you were hot on the energy. So coming back to this, almost, I won't quite say detached, but almost knowledge that there is something deeper. You know, we can let this play out without trying to get too OTT, too emotional about it. And admittedly, I can get lost in it myself, but going to have recourse to God to pray, to be still. I think we will be able to see this through and have the poise and the wisdom to make the right moves. And when it comes to leaving England, personally, I don't think it's the right move at the moment. I think, you know, it's an ancient homeland. It's deep in our bones. It's holy to us. It's sacred to us. But there are harsh realities here, which, you know, I've started to say gingerly, but I have thought for a while. In my view, modernity is going to get messy. And there are basically, the things have been unleashed here. that are going to be hard to put back in the box. And I don't know how things are going to develop. It's hard to see, England becoming like it was in 1950 again. It's hard to see how we're going to manufacture some, in the next 20 to 30 years, some political program which is going to see that happen. Personally, at this point, I'm willing to stay in England, willing to stand by England, but I'm starting to think more about, well, look, where is Christendom going? Where is the energy going? Where are the people going who are willing to stand together in this? Because I think balkanization is virtually inevitable at this point. So it might be a region that I'm more loyal to, because that might be a part that maintains England. Maybe it'd be the holy parts of England, obviously, around sort of, southwest is a very strong spiritual energy in England there, and often always has been. Or maybe, it could be parts of Europe. And I know it sounds quite out there, but I think we're entering a time of flux and change. So while I am more than willing to defend what's there, I do think it's going to be a balance between what modernity is going to destroy and what can be kept alive, and where the heart of the tradition and the spirit goes. And with that, for me, it will be an element of English people and British people and European people. I do want to maintain that into the future. I don't think it's right that they should be eradicated and made dispersed. So that will be a factor into my thinking. But it will have to be rooted in the spirit. So it's a long answer. I hope you don't mind. But there's just a lot going on there. And I think, my approach is first of all, get rooted in the spirit. And then that will give us, the Holy Spirit will guide us in where to go next.
Yes, and I was just thinking that while you were talking about that as well. These are issues we are going to have to face. We're still relatively young men at this point, and this conflict is rising, and it's going to become a real problem. And as to your point, is that what does God want us to do? Does he want peoples to be homogenous? Does he want that's a key question. That's why I began the whole process when I was in my ethnic research. So well, the only way is to be able to be in a position to ask him, how does one do that? And to receive an answer about this sort of thing. And that's where all of mysticism came in. Getting to that point of having that, was that you breathing? Or
I was going to come in. I don't want to interrupt you, and you're in a good flow, but I was going to comment on, I think there are forces attempting to homogenize the earth, but I don't think that they will come close to succeeding. That actually there's all kinds of reasons that project is doomed to failure. That doesn't mean that there won't be a lot of blood spilt in the attempt, and I generally think we should celebrate having different nations, different ethnicities, and God will one day be worshipped by a great variety of humanity, and each distinct and wonderful in their own, and also flawed in their own ways. So I guess one also responding a little bit to what Richard was saying as well. There are definitely going to be tough fallouts as the project of modernity marches forwards, and all kinds of difficult shifts around the world, things that we need to take positions on and react to. I tend to prefer sticking where I am, rooted in place, as it were, where I was born, where I was brought up. As things change around me, whether I like those changes or not, I don't want to move unless absolutely forced. And therefore, I think the hope for Christians is to found these strong, tight-knit communities in the middle of the chaos and create little pockets of order. And I do think that has happened throughout history, even in the, maybe we don't even hear the stories because all that's preserved is the large scale tragedy happening. But I do think God preserves, these little ark-like, it's like a life raft, a little secret church here or there. Who knows how far that will end up going? But I think we can have simultaneously despair about the broad civilization that we live in, and I think it's right to try to preserve that and prevent the decay, because the decay will be will be both unpleasant and ungodly. But at the same time, nations rise and nations fall, and that is the pattern throughout history, that no man-made institution lasts forever, and only the God-made institution of the church lasts forever. So in the period of collapse, which perhaps we are entering into, one of the big benefits spiritually will be that the churches will again be populated by true believers, rather than the kind of watered down social club which many churches have become. I really think once true persecution of churches begins, I mean, when Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, we have to remember that in many ways the position of Christians in the UK has been a whole bunch of rich men trying to, like camels trying to pass through the eye of the needle. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised that there's been decay in the church as well. And actually, I have this strange kind of twin feeling about the future where, of course, I want to see a lot of the dark forces in civilization reversed, and I think it's right to pray for the direction of travel to be changed. But on the other hand,
the second part of this conversation is available for fellowship joiners. The links are in the replies. Join my website at scottmannion.com/fellowship or on substack.scottmannion.com.